There are two psychological schools of thought, aren't there? One is that we're formed by the past, and one is that we have our own destiny and we can shape it any way we like. I think we are formed by the past. It was very brutal. It just was brutal. I spent 6 years in this place and was beaten up quite regularly by grown men with sticks. You have to develop an attitude to it, otherwise you'll sink. I developed the attitude that it was ridiculous and funny. And that somehow made me the winner over these brutal men.
Hello and welcome to The Big Interview. Our guest this week has been a familiar fixture of British comedy for more than 40 years and was half of one of its best-loved double acts of all time. Adrian Edmondson and his longtime collaborator, the late Rik Mayall, were launched to fame by the alternative comedy boom of the early 1980s, as members of influential ensemble The Comic Strip and as stars of the uproarious and innovative sitcom The Young Ones, in which Edmondson played Vivian, a lovably psychotic punk rocker. Edmondson and Mayall later created and starred in the much-loved series and stage show Bottom, chronicling the travails of two hapless Hammersmith deadbeats, of which Edmondson's character, Edward Elizabeth Hitler, was marginally the more self-aware. Edmondson has more recently starred in film and television, played in bands, and written a memoir of an eventful career entitled Berserker. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I spoke to Adrian Edmondson for The Big Interview. Adrian Edmondson, welcome to The Big Interview.
Well, thank you very much. Well done for saying my name.
I've been working on that for days. Do people still get that wrong?
It's just very hard to say. I find it hard.
What, the double...
Even at reception when I came in here, they said, "What's your name?" And I say, "Adrian Edmondson." It's too many syllables.
Is it the double D thing that trips people up, do you think?
The N and the Ned and Adrian Edmondson. It's weird.
Your parents didn't think that one through, did they?
No.
Anyway, I was going to say one of the things I enjoy about my job in general are those moments at which I find myself thinking, try and explain to your 16-year-old self how this has happened.
Wow.
This is one of those, because I'm going to go and admit, the risk of making you extremely nervous, that for my 16-year-old self, I'm pretty sure there was a Young Ones poster on the bedroom wall.
Wow.
There may even have been a T-shirt, not on the wall, obviously. That would have been...
Was this in Oz?
Insane. That would have been in Australia, where we got it a few years late, as we got everything late at
Wasn't
the
that
time.
late? You didn't get it that much later, did
3
you?
or 4 years,
Was
I think.
it?
Yeah, unless we missed the first screening, that's entirely possible. But it did cause me to wonder, especially when you're up in London, milling around in this vast metropolis, do you ever pause to wonder at the people walking towards you and think, how many of these people at some point have sat on a sofa and laughed at something I've done?
Well, do you know, I mean, I've got better at it. I used to absolutely loathe it when people would come up. I'd find it sort of cringeworthy. And now I've sort of got used to it, and I've actually become genuinely pleased that people were happy. Do you know what I mean? It's as basic as that. It's a very powerful thing to have made someone laugh, I think, and laugh in a way that I always used to say. You said you were 16. Once we got them in the church, if you got them in the church young, you sort of had them for life. You know, the very few people who would throw it off.
It is a gift, though, to be able to not only do that, but to have made quite a long career out of doing that.
Yeah, that's a weird... No one knows how to do that, but some of us stick in there and kind of get to the... keep going.
Because
I do look at people and I think, what happened to him? And you think, he's tailed off, hasn't he? What's he doing? Is he sitting in a house somewhere watching his old videos? That sounds very cruel.
You do talk about your sort of slightly mixed feelings about some of your work in your memoir, Berserker. But do you still get surprised, even if you're not watching it yourself, that things like The Young Ones and Bottom in particular do still have a life on repeat channels? They are still sort of excerpted and memed on social media. Does it surprise you? I channel surf as much as anyone else, and so I click through Gold occasionally, and you'll see a bit of The Young Ones, and I'm always slightly kind of disappointed by The Young Ones. I am. There's an awful lot of rubbish in The Young Ones. There's some really good bits. I thought the sitcom bits are really good. I thought all the wacky stuff was
tried for.
The strange, surreal cutaways, that kind of stuff.
The puppets, people walking through walls and a ghost with this. It was all a bit tried for. The essential kind of four blokes in a flat is very funny. But then when I see Bottom, I'm always incredibly pleased. I think that stands up better.
Is that, do you think, because you had more direct input into Bottom, you wrote that as well as just starring in it?
I think we were just better at it by then. The Young Ones is very famous because it was new, and there was a kind of, it turned a corner. We wanted to make unpleasant characters. This was quite new in television, as compared to The Good Life especially, but...
As your character memorably did, in one sort of well-remembered soliloquy. But do you think by the time Bottom came up, then you and Rik Mayall, your long-term creative partner, had just got better at being unpleasant?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we'd been doing it since we met at uni. So we would have been doing it by the time we did Bottom. We'd have been doing it for 15 years. So you do get better at stuff. The shorthand gets better, and you get to solutions quicker, and that makes funny.
It did cause me to wonder, though, reading the book and re-watching some of the programmes you made together, whether either of you ever discussed what worked about your partnership, or were you both just happy that it did? Because it is that, I think it's a bit like, in the same way that rock bands are always more than the sum of their parts. You take even a great songwriter out of their band, their solo records are never quite as good.
Yeah.
You do need to have found the right people or person at the right time. Did you ever wonder what it was about the two of you together?
It's weird, isn't it? Because I was watching an interview with REM the other day, and they got back together to be inducted into something, and you could feel the simmering hatred amongst them as the four of them sat around a table. And we never got that far. I think we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. And we genuinely loved each other's characters, the fictional characters.
This is Richard and Eddie Hitler in Bottom.
Yeah, so I was a huge fan of Richie Rich. And... people don't believe this. I used to write more of that, and he used to write more of Eddie. Generally, that was the kind of, that's where it was. So, and it was like a proxy bromance. Do you know what I mean?
I do want to come back to that theme of bromance. I do have one, if you'll forgive me, incredibly nerdish, minute question about Bottom, which is, it's the wondrous bathos of the name of your character, Eddie Hitler. Where did that actually come from? Were there other things you thought of or suggested and then scratched out?
Do you know, I don't think there ever were. I think it just sort of appeared. What's a very stupid name? What would people have trouble with in the world?
I was just...
And then his middle name, Elizabeth.
I was just wondering in particular if it had been inspired by the fact that, and I know this from having sat and suffered through pub quizzes, there was a British Hitler family. Adolf Hitler had a nephew in Toxteth called Bill.
Did he really?
Bill Hitler.
I never knew that.
So, see, I thought that may have been where it came from.
You think you'd change that, didn't you?
To Ian Hitler or something. But it was just something that struck you as incongruous and weird.
Yeah, I mean, names are always funny, aren't they? I mean, Eddie and Richie were our names for each other in real life, so we had to give them surnames. We called him Richard, just because that sounded ridiculous. And I can't remember the creation of it, but it's just a very stupid name. There's a great episode where we're running the shop down below, and someone comes in, and I tell him my name, and he says, "Any relation?" And I say, "Yes." It's one of my favourite gags.
But going back to that theme of bromance, I did wonder, obviously I'm assuming you and Rik Mayall were not given to visiting monstrous violence on each other in private life, although do correct me if that assumption is wrong, but did the relationship between Richard and Eddie reflect at all your own friendship?
I think there's kind of missing link in your questioning, which is that when we met at university, we discovered we'd been the same sort of person at our individual schools. The bloke who did all the plays. And we both had a copy of the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band's Gorilla. And we both found Waiting for Godot hysterical.
It is?
Yeah, well, you're an unusual person.
So I'm
'Cause
told.
we're in the minority.
It's genuinely very funny.
Yeah.
And I can't believe Beckett wasn't playing it for laughs.
Yeah. I think he was. I think it's just subsequent kind of directors who've kind of hunted for meaning.
This is serious theatre.
When the meaning is obvious. We don't know where we are. We don't know if there's a God. What are we going to do in the meantime? That's all it is, and that's exactly what Bottom is. Bottom is such a kind of obvious Tom and Jerry version of Waiting for Godot.
But do you think there is in there something, because again, this is what I wonder about its endurance, if at some level, and it is a faintly terrifying thought, if that is kind of what all male friendships are basically like, there's kind of giving each other permission to be squalid?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I still have those kind of evenings in the pub with single or sometimes two male friends. Mm. And it's bizarre what we don't and do discuss. Things go by and you drink beer and then you go home and then you meet up 2 months later and go through the same thing and you think, did I ask that question last time? Well, I wasn't listening, was I? And it is sad, isn't it?
But did you work deliberately on constructing with those two characters? They are different characters. It did strike me again, rewatching some recently, that
one's aspirational.
Yeah, Richard's he's kind of an optimist, ridiculously.
He's middle class, aiming for upper middle class, and he's got a sort of vague history of some aunt who's obviously was a church warden or something, and so he's got this kind of social desire. Whereas Eddie's more lumpen and kind of actually more philosophical.
Well, he knows they're stuffed, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he knows this is
the truth. Yeah. So he's kind of fatalistic. But Richie's always thinking there will be a better world.
Depressing.
And that's very much like Godot.
Depressing to think that Eddie tends to get proved right, though.
Yeah. It's funnier. Dark and painful is funny. Optimistic isn't. You show me an optimistic gag.
You mention or allude to the violence, which was a recurring theme of Bottom, certainly of the young ones, and indeed your earlier work as the Dangerous Brothers. Yeah. Before I get into the possible reasons behind that, I do want to ask, or feel like I have to ask really, how often did either or both of you end up in hospital?
I would say about 5 times each. Generally, when we used to do the live show was more difficult because you didn't have camera angles to play with. And, a lot of people could see you, so you had to get quite close. Yeah, we opened each other's eyebrows up, and you can see quite a lot of scars around the edge of my eyes.
These are all wounds sustained in the service of slapstick.
Yeah. I remember once we were playing Sheffield City Hall, and there was a metal milk jug that I was twatting Rik with, or pretending to twat him. I don't know why we were using this metal. It had that thing you go to school for the water.
This seems like you're asking for trouble.
Which has got a kind of lip on it, And I just sort of went near his face, and I didn't even know I'd hit him, but it sliced open the top of his eye, and he literally gushed blood. It poured down his face, but he was such a sweaty performer. He was a really he was wet after 2 minutes, just the way he was. So he didn't notice. But he started to look like a gargoyle. It was one of the greatest bits of theatre I've ever been involved with. Because what happened was the audience stopped laughing.
Well, I would hope so.
Well, no, why? They pay good money to watch us beating the shit out of each other, and we do it for real, and they go all quiet.
I mean, that's a dramatic example of it. The Bottom live show was replete with the pair of you improvising and styling things out, things that had gone wrong. But how do you style out the possibility that you may have maimed your co-star?
Oh, we cut to the interval pretty early and stitched him up, pushed him back on. Look, he's alive.
It's like football in the 1970s.
Yeah, Terry Butcher.
Yeah, throw a bucket of water over them and put them back on.
Yeah.
But reading the account of your childhood, as you describe it in Berserker, and it's, I think, a generation or so before I went through school, or half a generation before I went through school, and teachers had, by and large, by that point, stopped assaulting children. It had become frowned upon. But this was this was a big part of your education, I assume, of
The
Rik's
teachers
as
I had
well.
were very, very keen on it.
Well, so, as the book makes clear, so I did end up wondering what amount of comedy made by that generation was a way of, I guess, externalising the violence of your childhood.
Well, I sort of make the conclusion that, I mean, there are two psychological schools of thought, aren't there? One is that we're formed by the past, and one is that we have our own destiny and we can shape it any way we like. I think we are formed by the past. It was very brutal. It just was brutal. I spent 6 years in this place and was beaten up quite regularly by grown men with sticks. You know,
I mean, it would be surprising if that didn't have an effect.
Yeah. You have to develop an attitude to it, otherwise you'll sink. I developed the attitude that it was ridiculous and funny. And that somehow made me the winner over these brutal men.
How quickly were you able to do that?
I think I was doing it, you know, at school. By the last few beatings, I think I was already... In fact, they gave up beating me in the last year and fined me. Because they realised the beating was doing no good. And I think they weren't getting the pleasure out of it because I wasn't giving them the reaction they wanted.
I did end up wondering as well, partially for reasons of my own, if another aspect of your childhood helped with that, because while you weren't technically a forces brat, your family's pursuits were sort of forces adjacent.
Yeah.
And you remark in the book, it's certainly the case of your wife, Jennifer Saunders, also a well-known comedian, that she is a forces brat.
Yeah.
And it's been my own...
Dawn French also.
Also a forces brat. It's been my own observation as a forces brat myself that we are possibly somewhat overrepresented in the attention-seeking professions. I don't exclude
Are you a
podcasting
second
from
child?
that. First.
Oh, that's unusual. We found in the comic strip group, which is a group of 6 comedians, 5 of us were second children. I think there's something in that as well, especially one that goes on to have more. The one in the middle always gets... I've got 3 kids of my own, and the middle one is the comedian. You know, I think they get ignored somewhere along the line because his parents are very worried about the first one and think they've sorted it by the second one. The third one, oh, it's our little baby. And the middle one gets kind of missed out.
But do you think the childhood mobility gave you... I've wondered about this myself, whether it gives you a certain ability to adapt to new situations and a certain ability to ride out unpleasantness because you're thinking, well, this is only for a year or 2.
Yeah, you have to sort of... I mean, until I was dispatched to this boarding school, I changed school every year from the age of about 5 to 12.
Yeah, I went to 7 or 8 or something, I think.
And I would get picked up on my name everywhere I went. Everyone thought Adrian was a girl's name. There was a wrestler called Adrian Street, and he was a very effeminate sort of character, called the sadist of sequins. Rocky's girlfriend was called Adrian. There was all this
The playground taunts rather write themselves there.
Yeah, and so I'd worked out that I had to either hide or establish myself. It's such a cliche to say, had to make people laugh in order for them to like me. But I think it's probably true.
Well, cliches annoyingly do tend to come from somewhere. Yeah. But in general, when you reflected not just on that period of your life, but everything that followed in Berserker, did anything surprise you going back and trying to sort of assemble the story of your life to your own satisfaction? Did you find yourself thinking about anything? God, I hadn't thought of that before.
Well, I worked out an awful... It was like therapy. It came to me. I'd been writing these bits for Radio 3 for the essay slot, which were vaguely biographical, and then COVID happened. I remember we were down in Devon, got a lovely house in Devon with a lovely garden, and I grew up vegetables, and I loved lockdown. The first lockdown. It was just so gorgeous. What happened was I realised that a noise had gone off in my head, had stopped, had been turned off. I made this new vegetable plot. There was an idea that we might have to be self-sufficient, wasn't there? Remember that?
It's really hard reflecting on that period of about 4 years ago to remember all the mad things that people thought at various points. I do vaguely remember thinking, am I going to have to go a bit Tom and Barbara in my own garden?
Yeah, but I was tending this garden, and I'd kind of worked out that I didn't know all the birds. Why didn't I know all the birds? I was in my 60s. I didn't know all the names of all the birds. And I was sort of looking them up, and I got an app, and you could record them, and it would tell you what it was. And there was one very singular moment where I was in my little veg spot, and I could hear a song thrush in a holly bush at the bottom, but I couldn't see it. And I spent half an hour, and it's not an exaggeration, standing in one spot trying to see a little brown bird in a bush and was so happy. And it was a moment of revelation. And I think it's seeped through the whole book that I kind of worked out that my life has been about being the berserker in question is a state of mind. It's how do you get through all this? You just fight your way through. You bash, you joke, you hit. You're wild, you're frenzied. And I'd finally stopped being frenzied, and even having a reason to be frenzied. And that gave me this enormous peace. The other thing was, I thought I wasn't going to work again. I really did. I thought, COVID will end, and then they'll have every actor in the world to choose from. Why would they choose me? And very happily, that was untrue. But I genuinely thought that. And I thought, well, I can see my whole life now. I can see my whole working life. I can see it. It's like, when you see a film, you can't really have an opinion until you've seen the end. And I thought, well, I've seen the end. And it's an arc. So I kind of could see it all as a kind of piece.
I mean, you do write about this towards the end of the book, that the berserker idea kind of fading, or the berserker characters sort of dissipating and dissolving.
Yeah.
Was that just a question, do you think, of getting a bit older, or being able to reflect on what is quite a substantial body of work? And I should stress to listeners who may be coming to you cold, it's not just the Young Ones and Bottom and, noisy slapstick comedy. There's been a lot of other stuff, serious acting up to and including the Royal Shakespeare Company, video directing and so forth, and music, which I do want to talk about shortly. Was there any one thing in particular that you sort of thought was the reason that noise had sort of
I think it's the fact
off?
That I've come to terms with I worked out what my relationship with my dad was.
Really?
Yeah. And I came to the conclusion that he just didn't like me very much.
That can't be an easy thing to get your head around.
No, but once you've realised it and you make peace with it, it's such a relief.
Do you end up blaming him for that, though?
Not really.
I mean, that's quite a hard one not to take personally.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it is. I was one of 4 children, and I was the only one to be sent away. And it wasn't because I was clever. I failed my 11 plus, so there was a reason in all that. And yeah, that's what I've brought it down to. I don't know why. He's dead. So Mum won't tell me. So, we're there. And now that I've found that and parked it and written it down, I feel so much happier.
Despite the fact that seems like about the most miserable, wretched realisation anybody could come to.
Yeah, but I've been living with it all my life. I used to sort of have panic attacks about it in my 40s, and not know how to sort it out. But now I've sorted it.
Do you think the urge, such as it was to be funny, has dissipated along with that realisation?
There are several different ways of being funny. And the urge to be that... whoa, yeah, wow, everybody makes some noise. I've always hated that. And there's a lot of that in modern comedy.
There is.
And so ours was always more considered and more about character. But even then, I found it... I once met Spike Milligan in an airport lounge in Dublin. We were both with our publicists and just been to do the Gay Byrne show or something like that. And I eventually stole the courage to approach him and tell him how formative he'd been. And then I dared to ask if he knew anything that I had done. And he said, no, I don't watch modern comedies because I know all the jokes. And I thought, well, what a big head at the time. But now I think, I know what you mean. And I know all those jokes. And I don't want to do them again. I don't see the point of repeating just that kind of being funny. So I kind of do funny in a different way now. I'm currently doing, I think I can mention it, I'm doing the TV version of Alien.
I think you can mention that.
Yeah. Well, no, it's whether the non-disclosure agreement allows me to.
As long as they sue you, not us.
I've seen it in trade papers. And I can't tell you much about the character, but I can tell you that there's a way of getting that deep, satisfying kind of humour from a non-humorous character.
Like in what kind of way?
It's very hard without giving too much away. You might have to ditch this bit.
Is there an example from a non-humorous character you've played that you are allowed to talk about?
I did something called A Spy Among Friends, and I played the head of the MI5. And the sort of game of cat and mouse he has with Philby and his associates is all historical and real and kind of factual, but imbued with the sense of fun and the chase. The laughs aren't kind of, I'll tell that one down the pub tomorrow.
Well, both the book and the series are very good at demonstrating the extent to which it was seen as a game by those who were playing it.
Yeah, and I find that very funny. That's the kind of humour I like.
I mean, was it, and it is a depressing subject to broach, but I think it is 10 years ago this year that Rik Mayall died, very, very young. There must have been a period after that at which you just thought, can I do this without him?
I had a band at the time called the Idiot Bastard Band with Phil Jupitus and Neil Innes. We really enjoyed it. It was mostly a rehearsal band. We used to have a residency at this pub and we'd do what we called live rehearsals. And that was really good fun and kind of Dadaist in a way and really satisfying. Then radio started kind of poking its nose in, saying, would you like to make a pilot? So we made a pilot and then it got commissioned. And at that point I thought, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want that pressure of that kind of joke anymore. I've done it. I've done those jokes. Don't need to. I want to do new, exciting stuff.
Does the band you're playing in now count among that new, exciting stuff?
The Bad Shepherds have gone back to the farm, actually. So I'm bandless at the minute, mainly because I've started doing a lot more acting work, and music books are a long way ahead. And you were starting to cramp my style. You suddenly have 5 festivals booked over the summer, and you think, if a job comes in there, I can't work for 2 months. So I've kind of limited myself to it.
So to bring us up to the present day then, I do wonder if this is a thought that is prompted by writing the life story or indeed doing an interview much like this. Do you find yourself wondering or thinking about what do I still want to do? What ambitions are there? Because what you've accomplished so far for most people who would start out on a life in showbiz, and I'm sure if you had been able to read this story back to your 16-year-old self, your 16-year-old self would have thought, wow, did pretty well there. What do you still want to do?
I want to be surprised. I want new. I really enjoy the distilled nature of acting in TV and film. It's of getting to a place where you finish the take and you're sort of, when you get overexcited inside, but you can't show it. I like that. It's a genuine thrill of putting down proper stuff. Some people just go in and say the lines. Maybe they have an easier life.
Do you have to psych yourself up for the serious stuff in a different way to the comedy?
No, not really. I mean, I've always said they're the same thing. They're just got a different intent. They're still characters. You're still being someone else. Eddie Hitler was as much of a rounded character as the head of MI5.
Brutally tempting though it is to close on that declaration, there was just one more thing I did want to ask you about, which taps into that a little bit, and it's just something, because it's probably the scene in which you have appeared which I have seen more than any other. It's one of those ones when it appears I find it very hard to not watch it. It's like when your favourite song comes on the radio and you kind of want to sing along with it. And it is the cameo that you and Rik Mayall make in Blackadder Goes Forth. This is Rik playing the appalling Royal Air Force fighter ace, Lord Flashheart, you as his rival, the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. Was there any conversation between the two of you before you started recording that scene? Like, what do you talk about before?
Do you know that scene was absolutely cut to ribbons?
No.
I mean, I can't tell you. There was a much funnier scene.
Oh, come on, this is killing me.
It was. Even when you look at it now, you can see the gaps in the logic. I mean, there's 2 or 3 good lines.
Was it much longer?
I'd say 4 times longer. And 4 times funnier.
Okay, well, if there are any sleuth / bootleggers / YouTube channels listening to this, there is a challenge.
Yeah, that would be. I'd like to see that.
Adrian Edmondson, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again to Adrian Edmondson for joining me in the studio here at Monocle Radio. Adrian's memoir, Berserker, is available now. That's it for this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Gunnar Gronlid and edited by Jack Dewars. From me, Andrew Mueller, thanks very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.